All right, yo. Test. Do we sound good? We sound good. I think we sound good. I think we sound good, man. All right, we're gonna do this. Let's dive into this. Let me get this off the screen. Also, as always, this live stream is being brought to you by BetUS, man. Use code YouTube150 to get a 150% deposit match on your first deposit, 125% on the next two deposits, up to $2,000. We're gonna check out BetUS here because I've been setting a lot of crazy things. A lot of crazy things. And this is one of those things, man, where I'm not even sure completely what I'm looking at, but this is the kind of thing that BetUS can offer. So I want to share this on the screen just so y'all can look at this. Because I was like, if I make this a community post, I don't know what to do with this. But if I show y'all live, you guys might know what to do with this. These are the Gatorade colors over the last few years, right? So I guess the Super Bowl winner, what color is the Gatorade going to be when it pours, I guess in the Super Bowl? So you can bet on what color you think it's going to be. We've seen purple recently, blue, orange was in there. Personally, I think I'd appreciate the orange. I think the orange is classic. I think the orange is the only color that you can go with if you're being honest. So I don't know. I would roll with orange. I think my bet would be on orange. I think that's the only way you can do it. I don't think it's typically a team color, but maybe it is. So yeah, shout out to BetUS, man. YouTube 150 is the code. I thought this was a wild graphic, but it was sent to me, and I thought it was pretty awesome, man. So if you're looking for your sports book, you just found it. It's BetUS, man. Okay, so let's get into this hiring. I can't be live super long here because I have to dip, unfortunately. But what I plan to do is I plan to return tonight and come back, whether that's a live stream or a video, something. Hopefully it comes out tonight. And also talk about the Detroit Lions presser for Brad Holmes and kind of go through that whole thing. And then also revisit this topic of who the Lions are set to hire as their defensive line coach. So their defensive line coach is set to be Kacy Rodgers from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And because this happened very recently, I don't have a ton of information, but I have some. So I'm going to share the information that I have so far, what I know about Kacy Rodgers as a defensive line coach. I'm assuming he's also going to come here and be our run game coordinator as well. But who knows? I mean, maybe there's a little bit more on his plate that we don't know about just because of his background. This guy was serving, I believe, as their co-defensive coordinator this past season as well for Tampa Bay. Not only just their defensive line coach, and then also took over the run coordinator position starting in 2022. So it's a perfect fit for what we're looking for. That being said, though, if we pull up this graphic, we know what Tampa Bay's about defensively. Tampa Bay's been a handful to deal with. I think in the back end, they're one of the most creative teams every single season. And the fact that he has been labeled as a co-defensive coordinator is something I don't want to overlook. They have a lot of things just going on the back end. They have a ton of movement. They blitz a ton. They typically are a very heavy blitzing team, and you don't really know where it's coming from. They have a lot of versatility up front, and they get a lot out of their linebackers. This is a team that's ran that kind of 3-4 defense, at least recently. Again, I have to dive more into the past and, where he's been. There is a connection here with Dan Campbell as well. This is the wrong graphic. This is the right graphic. I don't know what that was. This is the right graphic. He was with Dan Campbell as well back in Miami. So that's the overlap coaching wise. When Dan Campbell was there as a tight end coach and when he took over as the interim head coach, there was an overlap there where he was working with the defensive lineman at the time. He's also another former player, so it fits into that perfectly as well. I just grabbed some of the statistics. That way y'all can see what this is looking like, at least in recent years. He did serve as the defensive coordinator for the New York Jets between 2015 and 2018, and those are the numbers across the board there. But again, he's just But again, that was when he was handling the whole thing, and so much of that is about personnel and the movement that's going on there. But what I really wanted to focus on with this, this is something that you can look at, but I really want to focus on this Tampa Bay spot because I know more about the situation that was going on there recently when he's working as a defensive line coach and as he continues to get promoted to run game coordinator, co-defensive coordinator, working with Todd Bowles. And when you look at some of the numbers and the consistency, run defense, pressure percentage, obviously the blitz rates are typically pretty high outside of here in 2022, where actually he becomes the run game coordinator. There is a Bill Parcells connection. Bill Parcells being the head coach for the Dallas Cowboys back in the early 2000s. He also coached with the Dallas Cowboys defensive tackle coach and also a defensive line coach, what he was promoted into. So that makes sense stylistically speaking. But their front plays differently. However, one thing that I definitely want to point out, which I think is super important, and again, these numbers are fantastic, the run game is key because there's consistency at stopping the run, and one thing that's really hard to do is find consistency with defensive coaches. Year after year, it usually looks like this. There's consistency in where he worked, which is important, but I think what's really important, if we just look at Quick snapshot. Obviously, they played us really tough, and that was one of the worst games we had offensively all year. We scored 16 points, okay? It was a handful to deal with that. And I thought we adjusted and found ways to kind of deal with what they were doing in some of their cover 3 stuff and the way that they would funnel things inside. But the point is, they typically come in with a really good plan. And I think a great example of that we have recently is what we saw them do in the playoffs. I know they lost, but I can even just show you this to get things started. Is the statistics of what they allowed to Washington. And to me, this matters. The reason this really matters is because of what it looked like for us. The biggest issue that we had against that Washington team was this. It was the Lions' run defense. It was a disaster. They couldn't get stops on first down. I thought schematically they were put in compromised positions. Shout out to Washington because they had a really good plan for that. And we just kind of set ourselves up for failure. Well, if you look at what they did against Washington in the playoffs, again, they lost this game. But if you just looked at these numbers alone, Jaden Daniels' rushing stats, the rushing stats as a whole, Brian Robinson, 10 carries for 16 yards. Remember, this is one of the best rushing teams in football coming into the year. This was one of the best rushing teams in football going into the playoffs, I should say. Right? They were averaging about 150 yards rushing per game. They were one of the top yards per carry teams. Jaden Daniels had a lot to do with that, and I didn't think that Jaden Daniels necessarily cooked us. We did actually pretty well in terms of the design runs that we had to deal with. But the Detroit Lions constantly had Jack Campbell pulled out of the box, and they had to deal with that constantly in that game schematically. And they put themselves in bad spots. They constantly got defensive backs in the mix where if we didn't put a single high safety, we were really in trouble. And when you watch the way that Tampa Bay played that game, I think this matters a lot. I think this matters a lot the way that they stopped this team because you watch that game, and that was, I think, one of the worst schematic games that we had this season. We typically adjust. We have different plans, and we did adjust. But against the run, we were in bad spots, and I didn't think that it was a majority of the players that we have. I didn't think it was, man, we are completely banged up, so there's no way we'd have a chance here. Yes, do I think if we were healthier at defensive end, we'd have a better shot? Yeah, Hutchinson changes a lot of things, especially against the run. But the fact is, they were putting us in really bad spots, and when you look at what Tampa Bay did against Washington, they had a really good answer for it. And obviously, they've always have a lot of movement up front. There's always a lot that goes on there. From a development perspective, he's worked with some of the top draft picks over the last few years with Tampa Bay, specifically Kacy Rodgers. There's been some improvement there, especially as a pass rusher. Kacy Rodgers, he worked with Logan Hall. He's one of my favorites coming out of the draft. And they have kind of that body type of the tall, 280 pounds, 3-4 defensive end that fits them stylistically. But they also play a lot of those underfronts. So you'll see kind of that shift in what they do. So does this mean Larry Foote is coming in as DC? If so, interesting hire. Ex-linebackers tend to do well as defense coordinator. Larry Foote. For us? You talking about for us? Larry Foote. Is Larry Foote connected to the Lions? I must have missed it. I didn't even know that was a thing. Larry Foote is connected to the Lions. I don't know what the heck we're going to do with defensive coordinator. I'm still not completely sure. My plan was tomorrow to dive into all of that because of all these, guys leaving. I don't know what we're going to do at defensive coordinator. Larry Foote? Okay, that was all right, Larry Foote. Dennis Allen has taken the Bears job. I think he's waiting on Dan or Glenn. Dennis Allen would make sense stylistically as well. But again, I want to keep this video focused on the defensive line coach that we're set to hire just because this is going to be shorter. This isn't going to be a kind of a back and forth, unfortunately, just because of the time that I have. But I can revisit. We could talk about this more on a live stream going forward. I just want to focus on the defensive line coach that we brought in today. And I want to show some clips. I want to show some clips. You shouldn't get copyrighted. Here we go. Let's go through some of these clips. Because this team was a handful, man. We had to deal with them earlier this season. Again, they were fantastic against us. They were really good against Washington. There's so many things that I like about what they do up front. I think there's a little bit of carryover. I think it'll be different stylistically from what we do versus the way that they play just because of the talent they continue to bring in. But I think that there are some things that could potentially carry over. Obviously, the Lions this season flashed a lot of their flexibility. There's going to be questions. Is Levi going to be brought back? I think he should be. If the number makes sense, I think he should be brought back. He adds a lot of flexibility. He's one of the guys that fits in, I think, really well to what a team like this did stylistically last season. So I think it would make a ton of sense there. And then, of course, you had all that flexibility. We'll see that in some of their pass rush downs as well, the flexibility that they brought to the table, though. Ultimate question is, since Kacy Williams is joining the Lions as their defensive coordinator, who's going to join the team? So he's not, I don't think he's coming as a defensive coordinator. I don't think he's joining as defensive coordinator. He's joining as a defensive line coach from the early reports that we have. Now, there could be more to that. Yeah, I guess I should have maybe made that clear in the title, but I don't believe he's actually joining as the defensive coordinator. He's joining as the Lions defensive line coach that we just lost in Terrell Williams. So let me point that out. And this was really because he was on the final year of his contract. His contract just expired. So even though it's not maybe just a direct moving up to the next spot within his job, what it is he is going from not having a contract to coming over here. So let's make that clear. He's not coming as their defensive coordinator from what we know now. He's coming as the Lions defensive line coach. And I think, again, you see it by the different fronts that they would run, right? They were a unique team, and this is one of those things that we also saw with Washington, that they would be a handful. You saw these unbalanced offensive line sets that were a problem to deal with, and the way that they would shift defensively, and to kind of shift the defensive line coach, my mistake, who's going to join the team as defensive coordinator. Yeah, that is the question, and again, we'll visit that. I just can't do that in today's live stream because of time reasons. I don't have time to dive into all that today, or in this live stream. I have to focus on the defensive line coach. That way it kind of serves as like a video. But when you see the different front types that we would run, and you see kind of the different fronts that they would run that would fit, and there was a lot of flexibility up front. It was different. But, man, this team was constantly a handful to deal with. So let's roll through some of these clips here from this game. Spelling Kacy with a K is a red flag. That's a red flag? How do you spell Kacy? See, you spell Kacy usually with a C? I guess so. I don't know any Kacys, though. So for me, I think it makes sense, but I don't know any Kacys. So I guess, this is kind of my first time meeting a Kacy. I don't think I know any Kacys, just to be, that's kind of how it is for me. But again, this 3-4 defense front, it was usually unbalanced. I think there's things that are going to be different here. I think that with Derek Barnes, there's potentially things that you could like about how this is going to develop. What do you think about what they've gotten out of Yaya Diaby? He's been, I think, one of the most underrated defensive linemen, specifically outside linebackers. Obviously, this year they went out and drafted Chris Braswell out of Alabama to play outside linebacker for them as well. And they handled a lot of the creativity that they brought. I think the way that they handled Brian Robinson was everything. Austin Eckler, 8 carries, 27 yards. I think the way that they handled the backs just in general was everything when I look at this. And I think that this recency matters a lot. I think it matters a lot what he brought to the table in the way that they played this team, because the way the Lions played him again, I thought the plan was pretty much of a disaster. I thought that was a huge disaster. And I think when you look at the way that they would shift their defensive fronts, again, the way they would kind of overload sides of the line of scrimmage specifically, obviously they had a ton of flexibility, so they're a heavy blitzing team, and being a co-defensive coordinator, it makes sense to bring him in. Again, probably pretty well regarded in that sense, and obviously the numbers, it's not like he's coming off a bad season where he's just let go. His contract just simply expired. 3-man rushes, extra rushers, blitzing, and they got after Washington. And they made that offensive line look shaky. And this was the first game that I watched in preparation for this game. So this was a lot to do with why I thought that we'd have success there. Now, obviously, they have a guy, Vita Vea, which, we don't really need to speak to development that he had, because that kind of speaks for itself. But the Lions with DJ Reader being under contract and Aleem McNeil's flexibility with some of those underfront looks where you can shift your nose tackle, and you can shift him to the opposite side of the formation where he could still play some of that gap in a half roll. I think it makes a ton of sense for what the Lions have. Rex Ryan, probably available for defensive coordinator. I mean, he's not in a job right now, right? He's talking on ESPN, so it would make sense that he's available for defensive coordinator. I know he wants a head coach job, but that makes a lot of sense. We lost because Ben. I completely disagree. I thought Ben Johnson had a really good game plan. I thought the defensive game plan was a disaster, but I have a full breakdown on that. I completely disagree with that. Anyway, who passed on 3rd and 1? Again, the route was there. A couple things went wrong. That's one of those in hindsight that I can agree, but we've done it before, so I understand it. But again, I thought as a whole, the defensive game plan, we didn't have an answer for the run. If you go back through that, what we allowed to their run game never allowed us to get into a position where we could get off the field, if we're being completely honest. We never allowed ourselves to get in a spot where we could make the defensive line look like this. And when you look at the way that Tampa Bay handled that, one of the best rushing teams in football, there's a lot of things stylistically that I loved about it. And it's an attacking, aggressive, one-gapping scheme up front that I think, again, I love. And I love the fact that with our flexibility, how well that can kind of translate over to what he did with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, the experience is there, so I'm sure things differently happen schematically. I'm sure things have been different over the years in terms of the way that he's approached it, which is what we'll have to do with a deeper dive breakdown. I think right now, focusing on the statistics is kind of the best way that I can look at it. You see the tight fronts, the 303 fronts, so they will utilize their zero technique. They'll utilize from 0 to 2-eye technique with their nose tackle, so that's a part of their defense. That doesn't really change. It fits for what we're going to do defensively. But I think the underfront usage is the most interesting thing of all of this, because it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different stylistically from what we do, right? The weak side, obviously the 3 technique hitting on the weak side, like a play like this, using your nose tackle, Greg Gaines. He was with the LA Rams, but Greg Gaines come in, so they had their 2 nose tackles similarly to what we have now, right? And what we've tried to do kind of with Kyle Pecco, that was kind of their Greg Gaines at the time. And then leaning into their 3-4 defensive ends. And again, you have the flexibility with your 3-4 defensive ends to prop them inside against a 3 technique or against an offensive guard like this. That's where a guy like Aleem McNeil could be valuable at the same time. That's where Levi's flexibility this season could be valuable at the same time as well. And then you would just see it. Like, this is an aggressive front, right? You're attacking, you're single gapping up front, you're jumping gaps like they would do. And this is a team that's given us a lot of the problems over the seasons in terms of coverage-wise. And typically, I wouldn't think that's something that's really important here outside of the fact that he was a co-defensive coordinator, that he was involved in those things, at least over this past season. I think that matters. And then I love the way that they would play up front. Like, some of the development, like Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, they were asking him to take over a big role. I don't know that that specifically happened this past season after moving off of Shaq Barrett, but I can't say, man, this was a super smart defensive front. They were blowing up our screens in this game, if you remember, like the flexibility they had. And that's the thing that they would cause is, if you remember this game, the Lions came out and they threw the ball a ton on early downs. And to me, that was a plan for Tampa Bay because they did the same last time they played this team too. But I think when you go into that, there's a reason for it. And so much of what they do on third down, from the back end and the creativity that they cause, and you don't know who the heck's going where. I don't know who's blitzing on the play. When you think about the flexibility that they had up front and the problems that they would cause, there was a reason why stylistically the Lions had to play the way that they had to play to find success. Like, there's a reason the Lions came out and said we're going to throw the ball in early downs, because if we have to throw the ball in 3rd and 5, it's going to turn into a disaster. And obviously we saw that it did turn into a disaster. But this is my point right here. You see some of these underfronts. You see the shifting of backers over to the strong side as they're playing it right here. So now you put your nose tackle on the backside of a weak side. And on the play side where they're going towards, this is where all of a sudden their nose tackle pops in over the 3 technique. And this is something I think DJ Reader's capable. I definitely think this is a great role for a guy like Aleem McNeil. And again, you can allow them to play multiple gaps and handle the guard at that point as long as they have the athleticism for it. And obviously, this didn't turn out as well here. But you can allow those things. And again, the way they were blowing up screens, Vita Vea, of course, had a fantastic season. You point to a guy like Broderick Martin, who is kind of the vision going forward as the backup nose tackle. We'll see if he can turn into that potentially. We're still looking for that development to take place. I think it was better this season. I just don't think he got a lot of snaps this season. But I thought it was better just in a very small sample size. So it's kind of hard to point to that than it was the year before. But all of the problems that they caused us, like, this is one of those things where I look at it and I say, if I'm hiring my next coach, look at who gave me problems, because we had a great offense and one of the guys, kind of like Chicago or going to Tampa Bay, I look there first. And I look at the guy that did well against a scheme that absolutely torched us. A scheme that absolutely torched us off defensively was much more schematic than I think personnel. So for me, I'm going right to that guy. And for the Lions to have a guy that has a connection there that already fits into the Bill Parcells tree and the way of thinking, that will definitely tap into the aggressive nature, especially if he's just dealing with the defensive front, in terms of he's going to be comfortable with the blitzing. You would see the blitz rates across the board every season and how high those are. Sacks every year always were in the top 10, so there was production. I think a lot of that had to do with the back end, because those things have to tie together to make that happen. And again, consistency in the run game is everything, because that is really hard to find year after year, which tells you that schematically there's a lot of flexibility, because you have to have the right plans to deal with run games. Because again, like Washington, we could have had the personnel to stop the run, but if we're constantly putting compromised positions, we're going to get torched. We're not going to stop the run. And with so many teams now having mobility of quarterbacks, you have to have a plan that makes sense to deal with that. You have to have a plan. It has to be across the board. Like, hey, are we playing single behind the back end? Are we manning to deal with this guy? Yes, we are. Okay, now how are we going to handle that up front? How do we not allow a team to constantly take Jack Campbell out of the box, run gap scheme at us, and we don't have an answer at the point of attack? How do we avoid that being the case? And this guy's been around for a long time, early 2000s coaching. So all that experience hopefully helps play into this. But I have to look at the recency, because again, I haven't been able to do a deep dive. We'll do that at some point and say that matters a lot. That matters a lot for the Lions in this next defensive line coach that they brought in. So I'm pretty fired up with the fact that the Lions went out and made this move on my early reaction. Everything makes sense here stylistically, from flexibility to coaching staff-wise, the connections that he already has with Dan Campbell. Everything kind of aligns for this staying on the same path as Dan Campbell has wanted to stay on. Dan Campbell has wanted to stay on that path of like, okay, I still want to play a lot of man. I still want to bring a lot of pressure. So everything ties into Kacy Rodgers making a ton of sense stylistically for who they are, but it also shows a guy that found a way to make it work. And when we got in that game, what we did not work. So I'm excited for the fact that I think that this is going to be a guy that clearly has found answers. And from what I've seen so far, there's a ton of flexibility just game after game. And he's a guy that's given us a lot of problems. And anybody that can do that, bring him to the Lions. Anybody that can give this offense problems, bring him to Detroit, please. Because we need to figure out what kind of madness this guy is utilizing that gives us those kind of problems. And anybody that's consistent in their job, I like that immediately. Because like I said, if you go for most defenses year after year, it's this. The Lions defense have been one of those unique defenses that have consistently usually risen. But one area where things have been up and down, if you look at it statistically, has been the front. It's been run defense. The back end has been consistent. And I wouldn't have guessed this a year out. The back end has actually found consistency. As personnel has improved, the Lions back end has gotten better and better and better, especially as they've continued to lean into who they're going to be. Man coverage. Okay, great. We continue to get personnel to fit that. So those things have been on the upward trajectory. But where things have had the ups and the downs and the flows have been run defense. And I know everybody points out, dealing with quarterbacks and mobile quarterbacks, and I think at times that's valid. I think at times maybe it's not. Terrell Williams had a lot of success there against that. But I think individually you just have to look at the game and say, why did this team cook us? Why couldn't we find answers there? And I think Washington came in with a plan, and I don't think we had a good answer for it. Straightforward, across the board. Don't think we had a good plan for it. I don't think personnel changes how that game plays out as a whole. I think there's instances where it could have been better. But I'm telling you, if you get torched on the ground like we do, and you're constantly in 3rd down and 2, there's not a lot of answers to get off the field there. However, I will show one because this is just something that caught my eye when I was watching it back, and I couldn't help but be like, dang, I'm a little bit sad that I'm watching this take place, and I watched the Lions game take place. Watch this 4th down and 2. Again, he's co-defensive coordinator last season. This is a 4th down and 2. Now, look at what they're doing versus what we're doing. Man coverage. Okay, seems very familiar, right? Man coverage defensively, linebackers. Okay, everybody's manned up on 4th and 2. This gave us a problem. We couldn't get off the field. Watch out how Tampa Bay handles this. Watch the switch they utilized that we didn't utilize. So they set up a mesh concept. Watch dropping off here, picking up the drag across the field, and how this plays out for them. Right here's the switch. Right here, they try to run a pick play. He drops off, picks it up, nowhere to go with the football, and it's incomplete. That's one of those things where I'm seeing that I'm like, man, that's what we needed. At some point, we just needed that. And again, this is through a blitz. So for you through a blitz to playing man coverage in the back end and being able to handle that means your communication has to be on point because you don't have an extra defender, right? We try to use extra defenders, guys who drop out as rats and they settle underneath. This is a defense that's not doing that. They're instead just having to communicate through these things. And that allows them to also create pressure on top of it, which again fits into exactly how the Lions want to play it. We want to be aggressive on 4th and short. Great. Have a good plan to deal with that. And this was a team that had the plan to deal with that. And I think even when you look at from development, just from a quick perspective, think about what they've done across the board. Kalijah Kancey got better from year 1 to year 2. I won't even point to Vita Vea because he's Vita Vea. I don't even want to do that. Logan Hall got better from year 1 to year 3. Pressures increased by the time he got to his final season. His run defense got better year after year there. You can look at a guy like Tryon. I wouldn't say maybe it's grown. I think he's a very smart player. I liked him during the trade deadline, but I don't know that numbers-wise you could say that he's gotten necessarily better. He was replacing a guy like Shaq Barrett, and that maybe did not happen like the way that you would have hoped that it would. You could point to Brewer, who had his best year in his NFL career this past season, just stepping in. I mean, it was the first time I think playing since 2024. And then again, even a guy like Greg Gaines, the improvements that we saw when he was just within this system stylistically as well, like the jumps that he took within this system, specifically as a run defender. So for me, you can see the early, like, okay, there's development. I haven't done a full deep dive, but early development, schematically, great planning, and defensively, stylistically, it fits what Dan Campbell's looking for. I think it checks all boxes from an early look. Maybe I'll get different results when I dive into this more, but early on, this is a great step in the right direction to go get a guy that was pretty well loved by Tampa Bay because there was no reason not to love him. The production was there constantly. You could throw another check. Production is constantly there. So it was understandable. I was like, I even read an article today and they were like, yo, why would this guy leave? Like, why would we let him out of the building essentially? And it was like, well, his contract's going to expire. And the Lions were able to scoop that guy back into the same spot. I love that. I love that. So this is going to help. Everybody gets involved. And depending on who that next defensive coordinator is, depending on what his experience level is, to have a guy that's done it, to have a guy that's been a co-defense coordinator just as recent as last year, that also fits under the Bill Parcells trees. Everything checks the box here. It makes sense early why the Lions went this route. And I'm pretty fired up that Dan Campbell has all these connections. Thank you, Dan Campbell, for having all these connections because, my goodness, man, this could turn out to be very, very successful. Our old D-line could create pressure. And that's the thing that's great is, like, Brad, from what I had seen so far, the presser, constantly year after year, we have been improving in terms of pressure rates. And, last season we were the top pressure team in football. This year we were still top 10 with all the injuries that we were going through. So I think stylistically the plan consistently made sense. But I think what has to happen is two things have to combine. You remember what Todd Walsh here, what the saying was? Earn the right to rush the passer. That was the saying. That's always got to be the saying. And I'm not saying the Lions got away from that because Terrell Williams constantly develops pass rushers. And I would say that here he did a pretty good job. I mean, Aleem had his best pressure season. I mean, you look at Levi had his best season. A lot of that was just being healthy. Like Aiden Hutchinson was on track to being the best pass rusher in football this season. Obviously, injuries helped derail that. But if the things don't tie together and the run defense takes a step back like it did, which is crazy. I mean, Alex missing part of that. Jack Campbell had his best season individually. Defensive line-wise, defensive end got worse. I think that hurt us. But, man, it took a drop. And when those two things don't combine, you can't get a team like Washington into passing downs. You're not going to open those opportunities. The Lions couldn't find those opportunities. So somehow you have to bridge that gap, and I hope that this is a step towards bridging that gap, and I honestly think it is. As for defensive coordinator, y'all are saying Larry Foote. I'm interested in that now. Let me write the name down. So here's my plan. Just because, time is, we got so much things going on, it's hard to catch up. My plan is tomorrow to go through a defensive coordinator video and just roll through names that I like out of house options. If you're looking for in-house options, yesterday I talked about Kelvin Shepard on Bleacher Report, so that's up there under the events tab. You follow me or the Lions, you'll see it. It's up there last night. I kind of dove into that, talked a little bit about Deshae Townsend. I gave one out of house option I thought was interesting, but the plan is tomorrow to dive into this fully in terms of defense coordinator options, just because I don't want to sit here and be live and be like, yo, what do you think about this defensive coordinator? And I don't know. I'm like, I don't know. He coached a little bit. Like, I want to give y'all information. Y'all know how it is. So I want to have a plan coming into it. So the plan is for tomorrow. If I can get to that today, we'll definitely do it. Obviously, if news breaks that we're hiring somebody, we'll go right to it. But the plan is tomorrow we're going to dive into that, whether that's live or pre-recorded. And then today, I'm hoping that tonight, I'm about to leave and then I'm going to come back. When I come back, I'll be able to dive into the whole Brad Holmes presser, kind of break down what he talked about, what y'all are saying about the draft picks. I want to do all that. Senior Bowl starting next week. I'm going to be at the Senior Bowl in person. I'm flying out Monday, so y'all will get draft content. If you want draft content, it's the place to be. I'm going to be there. Hopefully get some exclusive interviews. We're apparently supposed to have access as long as we're early. We're going to have access to all these things. So I'm going to be there. I'll be able to even grab a little bit of content from the Senior Bowl, hopefully what I can get, which is pretty awesome. And I'll be giving you content live with other content creators that are going to be there as well from the roundtable. We got about 4 or 5 of us that are going to be there for every day of practice. We're going to be there Monday through Friday. So I'm fired up, dude. We're going to have a lot of good stuff coming, but that's the plan right now. And hopefully I see y'all again tonight. I got to leave it here. I appreciate y'all joining, man. I will see you guys hopefully in a few hours with something tonight, whether it's live or pre-recorded. Y'all let me know. Comment right now in this video which you would rather see. And I think the Lions made the right hire here. And then eventually we're going to revisit this because the offseason gets long really fast. And we're going to break down this whole defensive line coach, and we'll kind of try to tie everything together as everything in the puzzle starts to go together. Hopefully that made sense. Appreciate y'all joining, and I'll see y'all soon. Thank you, Prop, for watching. Just like a video, I'm out.